As I was working on this quarter's sermons, I realized Mother's Day is coming up, and I thought, I wonder what I'm going to preach on Mother's Day, because those of you who've been here through a Mother's Day or a Father's Day, my policy is there's a lot of people who are going to be at church on Mother's Day who aren't moms. A lot of people are going to be at church on Father's Day who aren't dads. And so we need something, for each of us to gain some truth from, whether we're a mother or a father or not. And as I was laying out the sermons, I thought, oh, what do you know? Mother's Day, Deborah. And it just fit perfectly as we continue our study through Judges. And we come to Judges chapter 4. You may remember, I think it was last week, we talked about the problems that Israel was having during this time. You read about it in chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. Jabin is the king of Canaan, and he is oppressing Israel. He was a powerful enemy. He had 900 chariots of iron, and the Philistines were raiding the Israeli settlements. And so the scripture says in Judges 5, they were afraid to travel the main roads. They traveled over the side roads because they didn't want to be attacked. They were not hanging out at the village. The King James says village life ceased. There was nothing going on in the towns. The scripture says they had no weapons. Their life was marked by insecurity and fear. And the King James translation of chapter 5, verse 8 says they chose new gods. Remember, God warned them, if you don't destroy your enemy, you will start to serve their gods. And that's exactly what happened. And that brings us to Judges chapter 4 on this Mother's Day. We're going to talk about Deborah. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, remember that name, he'll show back up, was the commander of his army. I'm just going to skip through this. You follow along, please. He had 900 chariots fitted with iron. He'd cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, and they cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes settled. Verse 6, she sent for Barak, and they give you his chronology there, and she said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them out to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops, to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I'll go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Certainly I'll go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you're taking, we'll talk about that in a minute, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kedesh, and then Barak summoned these 10,000 men. Deborah went up to Mount Tabor with him. And so, verse 12, when they told Sisera, the enemy, that Barak had gone to Mount Tabor, Sisera got his people together and his 900 chariots of iron and went after the Israelites. And Deborah said to Barak, go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. Barak continues to chase the army, and all of Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. We have talked about people who think the Bible is boring. They've not read this next paragraph, verse 17. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. So he thinks this is an ally, this is a friend. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid. So he entered her tent. She covered him with a blanket. I'm thirsty, he said, please give me some water. She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. Stand in the doorway of the tent, he told her. If someone comes by and asks you, is anyone there? Say no. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he was fast asleep. Exhausted, she drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Somebody said nothing like that had ever entered his head before. Just then Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. She said, come on, I'll show you who you're looking for. He went in with her, and there's Sisera with a tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the land of the Israelites, the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. Some interesting insights before we get into this. In verse 15, where it says he routed the army, that word routed means to be confused or to be thrown into panic. And we get some insight into what caused that in chapter 5. Verse 4 and verses 20 and 21 tell us that God sent a torrential rain that caused the river Kishon to flood. Now that would help Israel. You know, I remember when Brian was playing football or coaching football, and it was going to be a rainy day. And it was like, I would ask him, who is this going to help? Is this going to help your team, or is it going to help the other team? You know, because some teams do well in the rain because they're a running team, and they can run in the rain. Teams that are passing teams usually have trouble in the rain. Well, iron chariots have trouble in the rain. When there's a flood and there's mud, those chariots get bogged down. But on top of that, the reason this is so significant is it was the dry season. It wasn't supposed to be raining, let alone a downpour that would cause a river to flood and your chariots get stuck in the mud. So that would explain why they were routed, why they were confused, because God was fighting for Israel. We just sang, the battle belongs to the Lord. And sometimes the Lord uses nature to accomplish his will. And so in the middle of the dry season, God sends a torrential rain that causes the river to flood, and the enemies of Israel are bogged down, literally. Now, Deborah is called in chapter 5, verse 7, a mother in Israel. There are churches today who have women in their church who are called mothers in Israel. It is a term of honor. It is a term of respect. It is typically given to older women who have demonstrated by their lives through the years godly character, and the church honors them. I don't know if they have any particular privileges or responsibilities, but I've known some women who were called mothers in Israel in their church. The implication is she brought life. Remember, the King James says, village life ceased. Well, a mother brings life. And Deborah, the mother in Israel, it implies that she brought life back into the village. It was not a matter of giving physical birth to a child. It was not a matter of gender. It was a matter of spirit. It was a matter of attitude. In fact, we don't know if Deborah even had any children of her own. So each of us, regardless of gender, regardless of whether or not we're a parent, we can be a person who brings life. We can be a person who makes a positive impact in an area that is filled with confusion and fear. Let's see what she did. The first thing, if you're going to bring life, if you're going to be somebody who is a positive impact and influence, is you need to have a word from the Lord. In chapter 4, verse 6, she says to Barak, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Here is a word from the Lord. Now, she was a judge. She was also a prophetess. And the scripture says that she was leading Israel at the time, and the people would bring their disputes to her, and she would rule over them. Women don't allow chauvinistic men to tell you God doesn't have a place for you in his work. She's leading Israel. She's doing this, and she receives the word from the Lord, and she then gives it out. Do you think our society needs a word from the Lord? Do you think there are people in your life who need a word from the Lord? That's where you start, having a word from the Lord. There are times in our own lives where we ask, does God have anything to say about this issue? There are people in our lives that have the same question. Where is God right now? Does he have anything to say to this? I almost sent you all an email earlier this week saying, I need some intense prayer because things were happening where it's getting time to put the drywall up at the house from the flood, and the contractor needed to know what we were going to do so they knew, whether to drywall or whether to wait on us some more. And I want to be back in my house, and I said, look, I've got to have some answers. But we were able to have a family meeting about the middle of the week, and all of a sudden, just everything kind of fell into place, and the options kind of, God is never early. We think he's late sometimes, but he's never early. But he will take us to the very edge. But it was like, okay, now we finally know. And so I spent the time that while Donna was in the emergency room, I spent that time sending letters to everybody impacted. We're going to do it this way, so you can go on and do this. We're going to do it this way. And finally, there was a certain level of peace that came of, okay, this is the decision we need to make. We need a word from the Lord. Moms and dads, man, how many times have you prayed, God, I don't know how to handle this situation. I don't know what to say here. I need your leadership. And aren't you glad that as a child of God, we have that option? We have that resource that we can say, God, what do I do here? How do I handle this? Because, if you overreact, it can make it worse. If you underreact, it can make it worse. It's like, Lord, how do I handle this? Give me your wisdom. The same thing is true, with our adult children. I don't know about y'all, but I used to think once our kids get grown and gone, then no. The older they get, the more serious the consequences of their decisions get. And it's like, Lord, you got to help them. You help them hold on to their job right now, and all of these different things. We need a word from the Lord. And God gives us his word. And Peter says the word of the Lord endures forever. So the first step in being somebody that brings life is to have a word from the Lord. Now, how does that happen? Well, obviously, it happens when you spend time with God yourself. You can't get a word from the Lord if you don't spend time with the Lord. I don't know if you've learned this yet or not, but God rarely yells at us. He speaks to us in the quiet times. And we need to spend time in his presence to get a word for ourselves. Because you can't feed somebody who's hungry if you don't have any food in your basket. And you can't give a word to the Lord, from the Lord to someone else, if you don't have a word yourself. And what you'll find is many times when the Lord gives you a word, it's a word that's applicable to the people who are in your life as well. So you spend time with God, get a word for yourself, and then you ask God to make you alert to the needs of other people around you. Because there are people who need a word from the Lord. There are people you may not know their name, but you are interacting with them, at a cash register somewhere, if they still have actual people, at the cash register, or wherever it is that you're having an interaction with them, and you'll never know when God will impress on you, speak a word of encouragement to that person. Those kinds of things come as we're in tune with God. I'm sure you've had the experience, I have, of getting at the end of your day and you kind of reflecting back over the day and you want to do that V8 slap because oh man, that was wide open. They asked me a question, they made a statement. It couldn't have been any wider to drive a word for the Lord through, and I missed it. I ducked it. I was afraid to go into it. I didn't want to do it. I was too tired. I was in a hurry. And I said, Lord, help me not to miss it. Those opportunities to speak a word to somebody. There was a server that came up to us one time, and you could tell she was not having a good day. And I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "Well, I just got out of the bathroom from crying." I said, "Do you want to talk about it?" And in this case, she said, "No, I really don't, because I need to stay together at the job." That's fine. But sometimes you're going to say, "Yeah," if they're not, and you'll have an opportunity to listen. You'll have an opportunity to speak some words of encouragement just by being sensitive to God. Now, sometimes God's going to tell you to just shut your mouth and mind your own business. But sometimes he's going to say, see if they're okay. And then, as you're building relationships with people, one of the things you can do is invite them to church. That's a very practical thing that, if you're talking with somebody and you've built enough of a relationship with them that they're really struggling, you could just say to them, would you like to come to church with me? It's not pressure. It's very casual. You may find that there's something there that will be helpful to you. And if you ever get involved with somebody and you talk to them about the Lord and they're frustrated because they can't understand the Bible, and that's becoming more and more real. We are living in a biblically illiterate society. People have no idea what you're talking about. They think the epistles were the wives of the apostle. They think Sodom and Gomorrah were husband and wife. They don't know. And so if they said, look, I've tried to read the Bible, I can't understand a thing. And I understand that because we don't speak 1611 English. And so talk to them about like the New International Version, the NIV. Talk to them about the Living Bible. Talk to them about the Message. Talk to them about some of these translations and paraphrases that are easier to understand. No, they're not all study Bibles, but I would rather somebody read 2 or 3 verses in the Living Bible and understand it than read 5 chapters in another translation and they have no idea what they're reading. And more and more, people are looking for, how can I understand the Scriptures? And a lot of times, as simple as trying a different translation is helpful. It used to be, when we had bookstores, Christian bookstores, brick and mortar, that I would say to people, go down to the Christian bookstore and just grab a chair and sit down in front of all the translations of the Bible, pick one chapter, and then read it in each of these translations and see which one makes the most sense to you. Maybe that's the one you ought to use. Now, at least you can do it online. And by the way, there's an excellent resource called BibleGateway.com where you can type in a passage and you can click which translation you want, and you can do the same thing online. This translation, that translation. There are a lot of resources like that out there to help people. If somebody has a word from the Lord for you, but you can't understand the language they're speaking, it doesn't help much. If somebody has a word for the Lord for me and it's in Japanese, I'm not going to get that word. So the same thing is true as you study the Scriptures. So the way to give life, whether you're a mom or a dad or just a human being trying to help other people on their way through this life, starts with having a word from the Lord. Secondly, give encouragement. Deborah was an encourager. She encouraged Barak in a couple of ways. First, she encouraged him with her presence. She says, this is what the Lord has told you. God's given Sisera into your hand, and you need to go up to Mount Tabor. And he says, I'll go if you go with me. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But it was a great source for him to have her with him because she's the one who gave him the word from the Lord. And we've talked about this over the last several weeks. I know it's a hobby horse of mine, but we're having a lot of people come into the house now with home health and so on, and meeting a lot of people out in the community. And I am astounded at how many people need encouragement. Just in casual conversations, you'll find out a child's having difficulty, somebody's in trouble with the law, somebody's having a health crisis, and they need to talk. And we need to be able to give encouragement. We need to be And Donna and I pray this, that when these staff people come into our home, we want them to feel encouraged. Even though we're not having the best of times, we want still for God to be able to encourage people through us. And that should be your prayer as well. Lord, as I go through the day, may people be glad they ran into me because I encouraged them. Little Johnny was at a Little League baseball game. And by the way, in case you don't know this yet, every preacher story, the boy is Johnny and the girl is Susie. That's just, you listen to any preacher tell a story, it's going to be Johnny or Susie. But Johnny was at a Little League ball game, and he's sitting down at the end of the bench at the dugout, just crying. And a kind-hearted person came up to him and said, "What's the matter? Are you crying because you lost the game?" And he said, "No, I'm crying because there wasn't anybody here to say, 'Way to go, Johnny.'" The encouragement of the presence of people. Again, I know that I'm using personal illustrations, what they drilled into our head in school you're not supposed to do, but those are the ones I know, and they illustrate the point. I was still relatively young in the ministry, and one of the guys in our church was a mechanic and was working under a vehicle, and the lift gave way and crushed him, and he ended up several weeks in ICU before he was able to be discharged. And I'm a young pastor, and we're taught when your people are in trouble, you need to be there. You need to be there. You need to go be with them. You need to pray. You need to read a scripture. And so I tried to do that. We were about 45 minutes away from the hospital at that time. And so 2 or 3 times a week, I'd make the trip in and go and just sit with them in the ICU waiting room and, try to do my preacher thing, pull out my Bible and read the scripture and have prayer with them. And when he was getting ready to be discharged, they said to me, "Pastor Ken, we just want to thank you so much for all of your help." And I still want to learn. And at that point, I really wanted to learn. And that was the first time that I had dealt with that kind of an ongoing situation that was that serious. And so I said, "Help me learn. What was it that I did that was so helpful to you, that you're so effusive in your thanks?" And they said, "You were here." I thought, oh, come on. I went to school, to learn the scriptures to read and how to pray and how to speak words of comfort. And you're telling me that what I did that helped you was I was here? And I think I spent that 45 minutes on my way back home thinking, I got to rethink this. Because what's important is being there. In more recent years, I had it pounded into me again. There was a sweet lady in one of the facilities where I was serving as chaplain. She was by herself at this stage of her life. And I would go in, and I was usually at that facility around lunchtime. And so I don't know if it's still the case, but back then everybody watched CBS because The Price is Right, I think, was on, and then the news, and then the Young and Restless. So I really became a Young and Restless fan. I learned that every single woman on that show had been married to every single man on that show. It was amazing. But anyway, I would go, because I always had the TV on. And so when it came time for me to leave, because I had, at that particular facility, about 100 more people to visit, I would hold hand and pray with her. And she would not let me let go of her hand. And then she would start to drift off to sleep. So I would try to extricate my hand, and she would tighten her hand. And from that half sleep, she would say, "Don't go." Oh. I didn't think she was still awake. But she wanted that human touch. She wanted somebody there. And I had to wait till she was way deep asleep before I was able to leave her. But it was like the Lord said, "Wilson, you got to quit being hung up on the preacher stuff and just be there. Just be a Christian. Just be there." How important that is to just be there. I am so thankful that Brian played football and coached football and basketball, because I learned so much from going to the games and talking to him about games. And it was so funny because when especially like, sixth, seventh, eighth graders, they get on their shoulder pads that are bigger than they are, and they're so tough. I'm on the football team, I'm tough. I don't need my parents, I don't need mom, I'm tough. But without fail, when that team came on the field, you could see those kids look up in the stands, looking for mom and dad. Now the cool ones would kind of stretch and turn their heads, just, and like, "No, I'm not looking," but they're looking. The encouragement of presence. I saw the cutest little thing. You probably saw it too on some social media. This little girl, must have been K4 graduation or something, and she's going across the stage and she's looking, and all of a sudden this big grins, and she starts jumping up and down and waving. She'd found her parents. Don't underestimate the power of being there, of representing God, of representing you're not alone. You're not going through this by yourself. So you don't have to say anything. Just got to be there. The second way she encouraged him was with her words. At some point she says to him, "Okay, go up. The Lord's given him into your hands. This is the time, go get him." Your words have so much power. Your words can mend broken spirits. Your words can mend broken lives. Your words have the power to motivate people to take on the challenges of life. You probably know the word encouragement means to put courage into. One of the guys who went to school with Brian, and he's kind of adopted us, and we've kind of adopted him. He's coaching track now, and he posted on Facebook the other day a plaque that his team had given him, and it says something like, "More than a coach, an encourager." And I responded to him. That's the powerful thing about words, encouraging. And he posted something like, "Sometimes all people need is the encouraging word that they can do it." And it's true. That somebody that says, "I believe in you," somebody that says, "You can do this. I know it's tough, but you can do it." Paul says, Ephesians 4:29, and we lose a lot of the power of this verse in the King James words, because it says, "Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth." But what's helpful for building up others, it literally means don't speak words that tear down. Speak words that build up. And what a test for the words we speak. It's so easy to tear down. Much more difficult to be thoughtful about building up. And not just, "Oh, you did a great job." Well, what does that mean? But to be specific. "I saw how you handled this. I know the challenge of this, and I'm proud of how you responded." Words of encouragement. Have a word from the Lord. Give encouragement. But the third thing she did was to make Barak accept accountability or responsibility for his actions. And this is where he says, "If you go with me, I'll go. But if you don't, I won't." And then her response is, "Because of your way of living, God's going to give the honor of capturing Sisera to a woman and not you." And that, I said, I wonder if there's something there about Barak that we didn't know. And I started digging and searching and stuff. And most scholars believe that what she was saying was this: "I gave you a word from the Lord. That ought to be enough. You ought to believe the promise of God and go into battle. But because you won't do it unless I'm there, then God's going to give the honor of capturing Sisera to a woman." It's as though she's saying, the word I gave you should be enough. You should have enough faith to trust that word. And I understand that. And I understand God was trying to teach Barak something. But on the other hand, I also understand his position. This this lady had given him a word, and if I'm going into battle, I want her there in case she gets another word, I want to be able to hear it. But I guess she was trying to say to him, and maybe God was trying to say to him, you need to learn to get a word for yourself. But at any rate, she goes with him, but she says to him, decisions have consequences. And because of this decision you've made, then God's going to give the victory to a woman. Now, if you just let me get on a little sideline here, if there's anything we're missing in our society today, it's accepting responsibility and taking accountability for our actions. Everybody's a victim. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always something else's fault. We never take responsibility for the decisions that we made and the consequences that came. We're always blaming other things. A politician one time, after they had messed up royally in a decision, said mistakes were made. Not I made mistakes, but mistakes were made. We need to understand, and we need to model and teach that decisions have consequences. And at first, that doesn't seem like a way to bring life until you stop and reflect over your life. And I would imagine you would say, when I began to take responsibility for things and stop blaming other situations, other circumstances, other people, when I started taking responsibility for myself, that's when I started to grow. That's when I started to mature. I heard a preacher the other day. He was talking about to people who are still blaming their upbringing and their parentage and things like that for why they are the way they are. He said, look, I understand that those things impact you, and I understand it takes a while to get over them. But you grown people now, you need to start taking responsibility. I'm not that mean, but that's what he said. But we do hold ourselves back when we're always looking for somebody else to blame for why we couldn't or didn't or shouldn't. So, as parents, we should model that decisions have consequences. And as our children get older and understand things, it may be when they ask us a question, we might share with them, not specifics, but we might share with them, yeah, I made a mistake and I'm still paying for it. Please learn from my example. Don't do the same things I did. Model accepting responsibility, because that helps others grow and develop in their own lives. And then the fourth way to bring life is from chapter 5, and that is keep the focus on God. The whole chapter of chapter 5 is a song about the great victory God has given them. And if you read through that chapter, one thing is apparent: the battle was God's. He's the one that sent the rain. He's the one that sent the flood. He's the one that sent the victory. And he is still there. The battle belongs to the Lord. And that whole chapter is a chapter of praise to God for the victory. You have enemies in your life. You have challenges in your life. And we need to be reminded that God is the source of our victory. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He still has the power. He still has the wisdom. He still has everything we need. And when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will still raise up a standard against him. The victory comes from God. Keep your focus on him. So as moms, as dads, as fellow humans in this pilgrimage of life, let's be people that bring life to others. Let's be people that encourage. Let's be people that lift up. I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, our homes ought to be places of encouragement and positive, and just, not sloughing over things. Oh, you got a D. That's so great. You didn't fail. Did you do your best? That's the question. Did you do your best? If you did your best and that's a D, okay. But I know good and well you didn't study a lick for that. And if you'd have spent 20 minutes studying, you'd have made a B or an A. Do better. It's not, I'm so proud. We're hearing a lot of that today. Good job, baby, good job. No, it was a terrible job. And they didn't even try, But the question is, are you doing your best? And I work hard at this to not just say I'm proud of you, but to say why. One of the young people that's kind of in our sphere of influence right now just got a really good score on her SATs. And I said to her, I know that a score like that means you did a lot of study and a lot of hard work through these years, and I'm proud of you for that. See, that it's not like, oh good, you're so pretty or you're so smart. It's you worked hard. You did your best. You showed discipline. I'm proud of that. So what you're doing is you're bragging on that life skill that's going to help them when their beauty fades and all those other things happen, because you're building character and you're being a person that gives life because of your presence, because of your words. So it starts with spending time with God, getting your own word, and then being a person of encouragement. People that they're happy to see you because you make them feel better. That teach them accountability if they're under your guidance. Teach them the accountability and responsibility for their decisions. But keep the focus on God. And as I was reading over chapter 5 again last night, verse 31 hit me. May all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. Oh, I love that. May all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. You know what the sun's like when it rises in its strength. If you've taken a summer vacation and you're at the beach and it's 120 degrees in the shade, you understand what it's like when the sun rises in its strength. But that's my prayer for all of you, moms, not moms, whoever. May those who love God be like the sun when it rises in its strength. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the practicality of it. I thank you for the example of Deborah and what we can learn from her. And Lord, as we study these old stories from your word, I pray that you would bring application to our hearts and minds and our lives, so that when we come together every Sunday, we're not just learning a Bible story, we're learning how to more effectively live for you, how to be a better witness for you, how to be salt and light in this generation, how to help other people find their way to you. Lord, I pray again for the moms on this day. I know for some it's a sad day, a almost bittersweet day. For others, it's a day of rejoicing. But Lord, I pray for each parent, for each family unit in our congregation, that your power would be with us, your wisdom would be with us, and that from this small church would come families of strength, families who love you, families who make an impact in their world because of their commitment to you, and because they are people who, like Deborah, bring life. May it be so, I pray. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and give you his peace, now and evermore. Amen. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here today.